The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy streets of Manhattan as Mr. Thompson adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror. Being Donald Trump's personal driver for the past 5 years had taught him the importance of looking professional at all times. His perfectly pressed black suit and polished shoes reflected his attention to detail, a quality that had earned him this prestigious position. As he pulled the gleaming black SUV around to the front entrance of Trump Tower, he couldn't help but smile, remembering his journey from a small-town kid to becoming one of the most trusted employees in Trump's organization. The morning routine was second nature to him now. Arrive 45 minutes early, complete the vehicle security check, and ensure the temperature inside was exactly how his boss preferred it. "Good morning, sir," he greeted Trump with his usual warmth as the businessman slid into the backseat. Today's schedule was packed with important meetings across the city, and Mr. Thompson had already mapped out the most efficient routes, accounting for New York's notorious morning traffic. The car glided smoothly through the crowded streets, a testament to Mr. Thompson's skilled handling. He'd mastered the art of anticipating traffic patterns and choosing the perfect moments to change lanes. His passengers often commented that riding with him felt like floating on a cloud, a compliment he took great pride in. Behind the wheel, Mr. Thompson maintained his usual alert posture, constantly scanning his surroundings through both mirrors and windshield. His eyes caught everything: the delivery truck 3 cars ahead, the taxi trying to merge from the right, the timing of each traffic light. This awareness had helped him avoid countless potential incidents over the years. The radio played softly in the background, classical music, Trump's preferred choice for morning drives. Mr. Thompson had learned all these little details over the years, just as he'd memorized every shortcut and alternative route through the concrete jungle of Manhattan. His mind was already running through the day's itinerary, planning how to best handle the afternoon traffic when they'd need to cross town for the 2 p.m. meeting. What started as a regular morning drive was about to take an unexpected turn. Neither Mr. Thompson nor his distinguished passenger could have predicted how the next few minutes would unfold, a moment that would test their patience, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately lead to significant changes in the local law enforcement community. The air inside the vehicle was calm and professional, filled with the supple scent of leather and the new car fragrance that Mr. Thompson carefully maintained. Trump was reviewing documents in the backseat, occasionally making quiet phone calls, while Mr. Thompson focused on navigating through the increasingly busy streets of downtown Manhattan. Years of experience had taught him exactly how to ensure his passenger could work undisturbed, keeping the ride smooth and steady despite the chaos of New York traffic. Looking back, Mr. Thompson would later reflect that it was one of those perfect New York mornings: crisp autumn air, clear skies, and just enough bustle to keep the city feeling alive without being overwhelming. The kind of morning that gave no hint of the drama that was about to unfold, a reminder that sometimes the most significant moments in life come when we least expect them. The first sign that something was off came when Mr. Thompson noticed the police cruiser tailing them for several blocks. Through his rearview mirror, he could see the officers' intense focus on their vehicle, despite the SUV's proper documentation and perfectly legal driving. Having driven through these streets countless times, Mr. Thompson knew he hadn't broken any traffic rules. The flash of red and blue lights lit up the interior of the SUV, reflecting off the polished surfaces. Mr. Thompson's heart sank, not from fear of wrongdoing, but from years of experience that told him some traffic stops weren't about traffic violations at all. He carefully pulled over to the curb, positioning the vehicle perfectly parallel to ensure everyone's safety. "Is everything all right?" Trump asked from the backseat, looking up from his paperwork. The sudden stop would likely delay their carefully planned schedule. "Just a routine stop, sir," Mr. Thompson replied professionally, though his gut told him otherwise. He reached for his license, registration, and the special credentials that authorized him to drive for high-profile clients, having them ready before the officer even approached. Officer Wilson, new to this precinct and eager to make his mark, approached the vehicle with an unnecessary swagger that experienced law enforcement professionals would have recognized as trouble. His hand rested on his belt as he circled the vehicle, despite the clear diplomatic plates and high-end professional appearance of both car and driver. "License and registration," Officer Wilson demanded, his tone notably harsh for what should have been a routine interaction. Mr. Thompson handed over his documents with steady hands, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the officer's confrontational approach. "Step out of the vehicle," came the next command, despite all documentation being in perfect order. Mr. Thompson exchanged a glance with Trump through the rearview mirror, seeing his employer's growing concern and disapproval of the situation. "Officer, may I ask the reason for this stop?" Mr. Thompson inquired politely, his voice steady and respectful. Years of professional training had taught him how to handle tense situations with grace. The next few minutes unfolded like a slow-motion scene from a movie. Officer Wilson began making demanding, unnecessary searches and asking irrelevant questions, each one revealing his inexperience and prejudice more clearly than the last. The security detail in the follow vehicle had already radioed for supervisor support, recognizing the situation was escalating unnecessarily. Trump watched the entire scene unfold from the backseat, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he observed his trusted employee being treated with unwarranted suspicion. The business mogul had seen Mr. Thompson handle countless high-pressure situations with perfect professionalism over the years, and this stop was clearly unjustified. Other drivers slowed as they passed by, some recording with their phones, creating an audience to what was quickly becoming a textbook example of law enforcement overreach. The autumn wind carried snippets of conversation between passing pedestrians, their whispered comments reflecting the obvious nature of what they were witnessing. The security team's vehicles had positioned themselves strategically around the scene, their presence both reassuring and a clear signal that this wasn't just any random traffic stop. The lead security officer had already contacted the precinct captain, knowing that this situation needed proper oversight. Through it all, Mr. Thompson maintained his composure, answering each question clearly and professionally, even as Officer Wilson's demands became increasingly unreasonable. His years of experience in high-pressure situations served him well, though the unfairness of the situation was evident to everyone present. Trump had begun making phone calls from the backseat, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested wheels were already in motion to address this obvious abuse of power. The contrast between Mr. Thompson's professional patience and Officer Wilson's escalating behavior painted a clear picture of who was truly representing their profession well. As the morning traffic continued to flow around them, this scene on a Manhattan street was quickly becoming more than just a traffic stop. It was turning into a moment that would spark significant changes in local law enforcement policies and procedures. The next few minutes would prove crucial in determining not just the immediate outcome, but the longer-lasting implications for everyone involved. The head of Trump's security detail, a former military veteran with 20 years of experience, watched the situation unfold with growing concern. He'd worked with Mr. Thompson for years and knew him as one of the most professional drivers in the business. From his position in the follow vehicle, he could see this stop was heading in the wrong direction. "Control, we have a situation," he spoke quietly into his radio, his trained eye noting every detail of the scene. His team had already positioned their vehicles strategically around the stopped SUV, creating a protective perimeter while maintaining a professional distance. The security chief stepped out of his vehicle, his movements calm and deliberate. He'd handled countless high-pressure situations during his career, but this one felt different. The morning sun glinted off his Secret Service pin as he approached Officer Wilson, who was still needlessly questioning Mr. Thompson. "Good morning, officer," the security chief said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to commanding respect. "I'm the head of Mr. Trump's security detail. We have all the necessary documentation and clearances for this vehicle and driver." Officer Wilson turned, clearly startled by the intervention. The growing presence of professional security personnel seemed to make him more agitated rather than less. "This is a police matter," he insisted, his voice rising slightly. "You need to step back." Meanwhile, the security team's photographer had been quietly documenting everything from the moment the lights first flashed. It was standard procedure, but today it felt especially important. Every interaction, every unnecessary demand, every moment of the stop was being captured with professional precision. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their phones recording what was becoming an increasingly tense situation. The security team noticed how some bystanders were shaking their heads in disapproval at Officer Wilson's behavior, while others were making calls, presumably to news outlets or police oversight offices. Inside the SUV, Trump was on the phone with the police commissioner, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to getting results. The security chief could see his boss's expression through the tinted windows, a mixture of concern and determination that usually preceded significant action. More police cars arrived at the scene, this time carrying superior officers who had been alerted to the situation. The security chief noticed how their expressions changed as they took in the scene: the unnecessarily confrontational rookie officer, the clearly professional driver, the growing crowd of witnesses, and the presence of a high-profile passenger. "Sir," one of the security team members approached the chief quietly, "we've got media vans approaching from the east." The situation was about to get even more complicated. The security team had dealt with media attention before, but this was different. This was a story that would write itself. The superior officers huddled briefly, speaking in hushed tones as they reviewed the situation. Their glances toward Officer Wilson spoke volumes about their assessment of his conduct. The security chief could read their body language. They knew this had gone too far. Through it all, Mr. Thompson maintained his dignified composure, standing straight and professional despite the unnecessary scrutiny. His patience in the face of clear prejudice made the officer's behavior look even more inappropriate by contrast. The morning traffic continued to flow around them, creating a strange backdrop of normalcy to this increasingly significant moment. What had started as a simple traffic stop was evolving into something that would have lasting implications for local law enforcement policies. The security team had seamlessly shifted into crisis management mode, each member knowing their role without needing direction. Some were managing the growing crowd, others documenting every detail, while others maintained their protective positions around Trump's vehicle. In the distance, sirens announced the arrival of more senior law enforcement officials. The security chief knew that the next few moments would be crucial. He'd seen enough situations spiral out of control to recognize when one was about to be resolved, one way or another. As the senior officers approached, their faces showed they understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. This was about accountability, professionalism, and the need for change in how law enforcement conducted itself. The next few minutes would prove decisive in determining not just the outcome of this incident, but potentially the careers of everyone involved. From his position in the backseat, Trump had a clear view of everything unfolding outside. What started as a routine morning had turned into something that made his blood boil. He'd watched his driver handle thousands of situations over the years with perfect professionalism, but this was different. This wasn't about driving, this was about prejudice. Through the tinted windows, Trump observed his driver's calm demeanor even as Officer Wilson's behavior became increasingly aggressive. 5 years of working together had taught Trump a lot about his driver's character. He'd seen him navigate through storms, handle aggressive paparazzi, and deal with all sorts of high-pressure situations without ever losing his cool. "Get me the police commissioner." Trump spoke into his phone, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making things happen. He'd been taking notes on his phone since the stop began, documenting every unnecessary demand and unprofessional action by the officer. The businessman in him knew the importance of details in situations like this. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the scene, highlighting the tension in everyone's postures. Trump noticed how his security team had positioned themselves perfectly, present enough to ensure safety but not so close as to escalate the situation. Their professionalism stood in stark contrast to Officer Wilson's apparent lack of it. Through the windshield, Trump could see the growing crowd of onlookers. Some had their phones out, recording everything. Others were shaking their heads in disapproval. In all his years of business and public life, he'd seen enough situations to know when something was fundamentally wrong. "Yes, Commissioner," Trump spoke into his phone, his eyes never leaving the scene outside. "I'm watching one of your officers harass my driver for no reason other than..." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The commissioner's response was immediate and concerned. Inside the vehicle, Trump could hear the muffled sounds of Officer Wilson's increasingly aggressive questioning. He'd employed hundreds of people over the years, and his driver was among the most reliable. The contrast between his driver's professional responses and the officer's unnecessary hostility was striking. The businessman shifted in his seat, fighting the urge to step out and confront the situation directly. Years of public life had taught him when to act and when to let proper channels handle things. But that didn't make it any easier to watch this unfold. Through the side window, Trump noticed how his security chief was documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamps, all the details that would be needed later. The businessman in him appreciated this attention to detail, knowing how important documentation would be for what would come next. More police vehicles arrived at the scene, their lights reflecting off the glass buildings around them. Trump recognized the uniforms of senior officers. The commissioner had clearly taken his call seriously. The morning traffic continued to flow around them, creating an odd backdrop to what was becoming a significant moment. In his years of business dealings, Trump had learned to read people well. He could see the change in the superior officers' expressions as they took in the scene, the realization that one of their own was way out of line. Their body language spoke volumes about what they thought of Officer Wilson's conduct. Trump checked his watch. They were now significantly behind schedule for their meetings. But some things were more important than business appointments. This was about right and wrong, about standing up for someone who had proven their worth many times over. The businessman picked up his phone again, this time calling his legal team. He'd seen enough. This wasn't just about one traffic stop anymore. This was about making sure such incidents wouldn't happen again. His driver's professional handling of the situation deserved nothing less than full support. Through the tinted glass, Trump could see the media vans arriving. The morning sun glinted off their satellite dishes as they set up their equipment. This story would make headlines, but not for the reasons Officer Wilson might have thought when he first turned on his lights. As senior officers approached Officer Wilson, Trump could read the situation clearly. In business, he'd learned to recognize pivotal moments, when situations shift from problem to resolution. This was one of those moments, but it wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning of necessary changes in how things were done. The Internal Affairs Office buzzed with unusual energy in the days following the incident. Investigators pored over footage from multiple angles, police body cameras, security team videos, and dozens of bystander recordings that had flooded social media. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of what had transpired that morning. The lead investigator, a veteran with 30 years on the force, sat at his desk reviewing Officer Wilson's service record. His experienced eyes noticed patterns that should have raised red flags earlier. Previous complaints had been filed, though none had reached this level of public attention. The morning coffee on his desk had gone cold, forgotten in the intensity of his review. "You need to see this," his partner called from the computer station. They'd discovered footage from previous traffic stops showing a disturbing pattern in Officer Wilson's behavior. The lead investigator leaned in, watching as the screen displayed incident after incident of questionable stops, each one adding weight to the current case. Down the hall, another team was interviewing witnesses from the scene. The testimonies were remarkably consistent, describing a clear abuse of authority and unprofessional conduct. The investigators had rarely seen such unanimous agreement among witness statements. Trump's security team had submitted a detailed report, professionally documented with timestamps, photographs, and precise descriptions of every interaction. The thoroughness of their documentation left no room for ambiguity about what had occurred that morning. In the conference room, police leadership met with legal advisors, their faces grave as they reviewed the mounting evidence. The commissioner, who had received Trump's call that morning, knew this case would have implications far beyond one traffic stop. "We've got the dash cam footage from the backup units," an investigator announced, bringing in more evidence. The recordings showed the arrival of superior officers, their reactions to the scene speaking volumes about the inappropriateness of Officer Wilson's conduct. The department's training officer sat in on the review, shaking his head as he watched the footage. "Everything he did goes against our training," he noted, marking down specific violations of department policy and procedure. The list grew longer with each viewing of the evidence. Throughout the investigation, Mr. Thompson's personnel file stood in stark contrast to Officer Wilson's record. 5 years of perfect service, dozens of commendations, and not a single complaint. His professional handling of the incident had only added to his impressive record. Social media was ablaze with clips from the incident, each one generating thousands of comments demanding accountability. The Public Affairs Office struggled to keep up with media inquiries as the story gained national attention. In a separate office, policy reviewers began examining the department's training procedures. This incident had exposed gaps in their system, gaps that needed to be addressed to prevent similar situations in the future. Their recommendations would lead to significant changes in how officers were trained and evaluated. The investigation team worked late into the night, their dedication to thoroughness driving them forward. They knew the importance of getting this right, not just for this case, but for the future of law enforcement in their city. Trump's legal team had submitted additional documentation, including a detailed timeline of his driver's employment and a record of his exemplary service. Each piece of evidence further highlighted the unnecessary and inappropriate nature of the traffic stop. As the week progressed, the investigation expanded to include reviews of Officer Wilson's entire service record. Pattern recognition software flagged concerning similarities in his previous traffic stops, creating a timeline of escalating inappropriate behavior that should have been addressed earlier. Department leadership met daily to review the investigation's progress. The implications of this case reached far beyond one officer's conduct. It was becoming a catalyst for examining systemic issues within the force. The commissioner had already begun drafting plans for comprehensive reforms in training and oversight. The Internal Affairs team compiled their findings into a comprehensive report. The evidence was overwhelming, from multiple video angles, witness testimonies, and the officer's own body camera footage. Each piece contributed to a clear picture of what had occurred that morning on the streets of Manhattan. The police department's largest conference room had never felt smaller than on the morning of the review board hearing. Senior officials filed in one by one, their faces serious as they took their seats around the massive oak table. The evidence collected over the past week was stacked neatly in folders before them, each page telling part of the story that had captured national attention. Trump's presence at the hearing added an extra layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. He sat quietly but purposefully, his very presence sending a clear message about how seriously he took this matter. His driver sat nearby, maintaining the same professional composure he'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the department's internal affairs chief began presenting their findings. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed to highlight every bead of sweat on his forehead. This wasn't the kind of attention he'd hoped to attract when he joined the force. "Let's review the evidence," the chief began, his voice steady and authoritative. The large screen at the front of the room came to life, showing multiple angles of the traffic stop. The silence in the room grew heavier as the footage played, broken only by the occasional sound of someone writing notes. The security team's documentation appeared next, crystal clear photos and videos showing every moment of the incident. Their professional approach to gathering evidence had created an airtight case that left no room for misinterpretation. The review board members exchanged glances as each new piece of evidence was presented. Trump's legal team had prepared a comprehensive presentation about his driver's service record. 5 years of exemplary service, countless testimonials from other clients, and a spotless driving record filled the screen. The contrast between this professional history and the events of that morning was striking. Outside the conference room, reporters gathered in the lobby, their cameras ready to capture any developments. The story had struck a chord with the public, becoming a symbol of the ongoing need for accountability in law enforcement. Social media continued to buzz with discussions about the incident. The review board members listened intently as experts presented analysis of Officer Wilson's past conduct. Pattern recognition software had revealed a troubling history of similar incidents, each one documented with timestamps and data. The evidence painted a picture of escalating behavioral issues that could no longer be ignored. In the afternoon, the police commissioner himself took the floor. His presence at a review board hearing was unusual, highlighting the significance of this case. He spoke about department standards, about the trust placed in officers, and about the absolute necessity of maintaining that trust through professional conduct. Trump's influence had brought unprecedented attention to the case, but the evidence spoke for itself. Video clips played on the screen, showing his driver's professional responses contrasted with Officer Wilson's increasingly aggressive behavior. The board members took detailed notes, their expressions growing more concerned with each new piece of evidence. The department's training officer presented next, methodically pointing out each violation of protocol and procedure. His presentation included side-by-side comparisons of proper police conduct versus Officer Wilson's actions that morning. The differences were stark and undeniable. As the sun began to set outside the tall windows, the review board prepared to make their decision. They had seen hours of evidence, heard from dozens of witnesses, and reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation. The weight of their responsibility was evident in their serious expressions. Trump sat forward slightly as the board members returned from their deliberation. His presence had helped bring attention to the case, but now the system needed to work as it should. The room fell completely silent as the board chairman prepared to announce their findings. The decision would have implications far beyond this single case. Department policies were already being revised, training programs were being updated, and new oversight measures were being implemented. What had started as a traffic stop had become a catalyst for significant changes in how the department operated. The chairman cleared his throat, ready to deliver the board's decision. Everyone in the room knew this moment would be remembered, not just for what had happened that morning on a Manhattan street, but for what it meant for the future of law enforcement in their city. The morning sun painted the police commissioner's office in warm golden light as he signed the final paperwork. The decision had been unanimous. Officer Wilson's termination was effective immediately. But this moment represented more than just the end of one officer's career. It marked the beginning of real change in the department. News of the decision spread quickly through the building. Officers gathered in small groups, discussing the implications. Many nodded in approval, knowing this was the right call. Some shared their own experiences, speaking in hushed tones about times they'd witnessed similar behavior but hadn't known how to address it. Trump's driver had returned to his duties, carrying himself with the same quiet professionalism he'd always shown. If anything, the respect he commanded had grown. Other officers now greeted him with notable respect when he drove through their precincts, a subtle acknowledgement of how his dignity under pressure had helped spark necessary changes. The police academy buzzed with activity as new training programs were rolled out. Instructors incorporated footage from the incident into their lessons, using it as a powerful example of what not to do. But more importantly, they focused on teaching better approaches, emphasizing communication, respect, and professional conduct. In the commissioner's office, the phones hadn't stopped ringing. Other departments from across the country were calling, wanting to learn more about the changes being implemented. The incident had become a catalyst for reform far beyond New York City's borders. Trump had insisted on being kept informed of the changes. His interest went beyond just supporting his employee. He wanted to ensure that something positive came from the unfortunate incident. His influence had helped turn a single traffic stop into a movement for better police training and accountability. The security team's thorough documentation of the incident had become part of the department's new training materials. Their professional handling of the situation was now taught as an example of how to properly manage and document challenging encounters. Their methods were being adopted as standard procedure. In break rooms across the department, officers engaged in honest conversations about bias and professionalism. The incident had opened up dialogue that was long overdue. Veterans shared wisdom with rookies, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with respect regardless of circumstances. The driver's calm professionalism throughout the ordeal had earned him recognition beyond his role. Other security firms reached out, wanting to learn from his example. His handling of the situation was becoming a case study in professional restraint and dignity under pressure. Community leaders were invited to participate in new training programs, bringing their perspectives and experiences to help shape future police interactions. The department had realized that meaningful change required input from all parts of the community they served. The media coverage had evolved from focusing on the incident itself to highlighting the positive changes it had sparked. News crews returned to the department, this time to document the new training programs and reforms being implemented. The story had transformed from one of conflict to one of progress. Trump's driver continued his duties with the same excellence that had characterized his service from the beginning. But now, his example served a greater purpose, showing how professionalism and dignity could triumph over prejudice and help create positive change. In police academies, new cadets watched the footage as part of their training, learning valuable lessons about the importance of professional conduct and the consequences of bias. The incident had become a powerful teaching tool, helping shape a new generation of officers. The commissioner held regular meetings with community leaders, working to rebuild trust and ensure the changes being made would have lasting impact. The incident had opened doors for dialogue that had previously been closed, creating opportunities for real understanding and progress. As weeks turned into months, the effects of the changes became evident. Officers reported better interactions with the public, and community feedback showed increasing trust in the department. What had started as an unfortunate traffic stop had evolved into a catalyst for positive change in law enforcement practices. Through it all, Trump's driver maintained his usual schedule, navigating the streets of Manhattan with the same skill and professionalism he always shown. But now his story had become part of something bigger. A reminder that standing firm with dignity in the face of injustice could help create meaningful change for everyone.